Hello, beautiful people of the internet. Today I'm going to show you how I created this funky squirrel animation in After Effects. Now this was created almost entirely with vanilla After Effects, so I didn't use any plugins for rigging or any fancy stuff whatsoever. This can be done natively in After Effects. The only thing that I did add, if you have a look here on the squirrel's tail, let me just go down here, is you can see there's a shadow here. I used a plugin called Shadow Thrower that you can get from the amazing Danny Stern. Just go and Google him and you can download the plugin for free. So this is going to be absolutely for free. Everything, there's no paid plugins whatsoever. Okay, this is not going to be a step-by-step tutorial. I'm rather going to take you through the whole process of how I created and rigged this little character, and the animation, and also the background, the composition, and everything else. So let's pop into it. Okay, let me explain the rig to you first. Now what I did here, you can see, is basically the body is just one stroke. Let me just solo the body. That's just one stroke. It's quite a thick stroke with 203 pixels. And what I did is I just played around here. If you go into the stroke properties, click on stroke, and you twirl all the way down and you see the taper there. Then I just played with the taper. And then now this is the magic. What I did as I selected the stroke, so you go down into your stroke, select the path, make sure you selected the path when you do that, and then you go to Windows, and we see your plugins down here, or your effects. You go to this one, Create Null from Paths, and then you click on that, and then you say you want the nulls to follow the points. So what that's going to do in effect, it's basically going to create two nulls, one here at this end of the path, or the stroke, and then the other one at the other end of the stroke. So the one is called, and I'm renamed this one front, and then I renamed the other one back. Then I just parented all of these front parts of the body to the null, and then I did the same for the back. Okay, let me just show you how it works. If I go into the body and I click on the path and I select it, now you see if I select it, I can do anything. And this is it works really well for a character like a squirrel with a flexible spine, and also to implement squash and stretch, which is what a squirrel does when it runs. So, and then the other nice thing is you make sure that your stroke is set to Bezier, then you can get all these nice curves. So that's basically how I set up the body. Okay, let's move on to the tail. The tail is very simple. All I did for the tail, if I just click here on the tail, it's also just a path, a stroke. And what I did there is I played with the, if you go down here with the easing on the taper, I just played with that and just to get that shape. So you go get a start length and end length, and then just play with the easing and the width and just everything until you get a nice idea, get a nice result. And then I parented this to the back null. The legs are just simple strokes. That's it. There's nothing funny with the legs. I just use simple strokes. The only thing that I must note here with the legs is that you need to, let me just go into the front leg. You need to be sure when you go into stroke, make sure that your cap is set to round cap to get that nice rounding of the paws. And then down here with a join, you want it to be a round join, because if it's on the default meter, it's going to make it, it's going to give it a straight line, unless that's what you want. If you want to go for that style, go for it. So that's the basic rig. It's actually quite simple. It's not that complicated. Okay, now on to the fun part, the animation. Okay, for the animation, the first thing I did is I looked for reference. It's very important that you always use reference when you animate. I can't stress this enough, especially complex characters like these, like animals, like quadruped characters. I found this on Pinterest, and this looks like it's from my favorite book, The Animator Survival Kit by Richard Williams, which you need to have if you don't have that. If you're serious about animation, this book is an absolute must. So basically, I just looked at this, and this is quite nice because it gives you the breakdown of every pose, and then you can look at them while you're animating. Then what I did, if I go into the character here, let's look at the animation that I made. The squirrel, if I go into the squirrel run cycle, is usually when I do animations like these, is I make everything hold keyframes. Then I literally sit and I sculpt the pose until it looks nice, and then I move on to the next one, say about 2 frames to the next pose, and then only after I'm happy with the result, then I convert everything to linear keys, which is a process they call splining in animation, and that is the way that most pros work when they animate in computer software. So, and then I just polished it there and add some easing and everything like that. So, okay, let's. This is quite an interesting character. Let me solo the head, the tail, and the body. Now, if you look at what's happening here, can you see what this is? Can you guess what this resembles? Well, if you said a wave, then you're absolutely correct, because the character moves like a wave. And you'll find a lot of these things like arcs and waves. It's a lot things in nature. You find it a lot in animation, because animation is based on whatever happens in the natural world. So if you look here, if we have a look here at the squirrel, there's a perfect wave arc on the first frame, and then as he goes down, as the body goes up, the tail comes. The tail comes down. Sorry, if as the body goes up, the tail comes down for counterbalance. And then it's got this perfect wave-like motion. And also another thing to remember is the squash and stretch in this character. As the character goes down, let me just unsolo these so we can see it in context. When the character's in the air, is stretched, and as he comes down, you can see that squashing motion. It really makes it pop, and it just creates that feeling of impact. And then as he launches himself up for another run cycle, he stretches out, and you can accentuate this quite a bit. And also another thing you need to remember is the weight of your character. So a squirrel is quite a small animal, and you can also see it here in the way it's been animated here. It's not a heavy character. Then another thing I did, if you look at the hind legs, there's a bit of a delay on the hind leg. So the front leg touches first, especially on the four paws, and then only 2 frames later, the hind leg comes down and touches the ground. So it just creates that nice offset. Otherwise, it's going to be very static, because you don't want to animate both of these going down. It's going to look very mechanical and boring. So this just creates a nice offset. Okay, that's basically it for the animation. Let's move on to the main scene here. Okay, I've got the main scene. Okay, so the next big thing we're going to look at is the parallax that I created while the squirrel's running. And I found this really nice and easy way to set up parallax in After Effects. Let me show it to you. Okay, I've made this new comp. It's called Parallax, and it's just basically got 4 squares, 1 in the front and 2 in the middle and 1 in the back. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a null, and we're going to call this null, let's call it move, because that's a null where that's going to determine the motion. I'm just going to put this null here. It doesn't really matter where you put it, but I'm just going to put it here. Then we go to P, separate the dimensions, and on X we put a keyframe, and then now here is where you want to determine the amount the speed basically for what you want to move. What I want to do is I'm going to use 12 frames and I'm going to bring this null over to the end of the square. So it's going to move this distance in 12 frames. Obviously, if you want it to move quicker, you make this shorter. If you want it to be slower, you make this longer. Now we've got an expression, an expression on the X. We put loop out and then offset. So basically what this is just going to continue the movement of the null, so it just moves forever. That's the first step. Now the second step is now we're going to create another null, and let's call this one, let's call this one center. And what we do with the center is we open up the position, separate the dimensions, and then we go to our move null, and then you pick whip the X position to the X position of the move. So that means when the move null moves, this one's going to move with him. Now we want to create parallax. And so we want some of them to move exactly with this speed and some of them to move slower. So that's very easy to do. All we do is we're going to call this one center. So this one's going to move exactly at the same speed as our original one. Now we want one that's a little bit more in the background. So it's going to press Control D, duplicate this one. Let's call this one mid 1. Now all I do here is I press W, not W, U twice. That's a bit confusing. So it's U as in the band U2, U twice. So U2 basically. Sorry, that's a bad joke. Okay, then I just go into this expression here. And where it says, okay, don't worry about all this fancy, this layer, blah, blah, blah. All you need to know, when at the end of the expression, you just put an asterisk, which means, which is a multiply. So we want this one to move slower. So the way to do that is you multiply it with anything less than 1. So it's going to move slower. Let's make it 0.8. So this one's going to move at 0.8 or 80% the speed of the original one. So if we look at it, we can see this one's moving at a different rate. And then we're going to create another one, call it mid 2, and we press U twice, and then this one we're going to make, let's make it 0.7. So this one's even slower, and then another one for the background. We're going to call this back. And we press U twice again to get to the expression, and this one times, let's make it 5. So this one would move at half the speed as the original one. So all we need to do now is we need to parent our squares to the respective ones that they're going to, for the speed they're going to move at. So the front one, we're going to parent that to the center. The mid one, we're going to parent it to mid 1. Mid 2, we parent that to the null of mid 2, and then back, you guessed it, back. And then now we have this perfect parallax. Let me just make the comp a bit longer. I want to show you something else quickly, because now we're going to run into a problem. I just want to make these layers go to the end. So now we're going to run into a problem. If we play this, now it pops on there. How do we get a seamless loop? So they just don't pop in the beginning and then go off screen. That's very, very easy. Very, very easy. We go to front, and then you duplicate the front one. That's it. And then unparent it. None, so it's not parented anymore. Then you go to your keyboard and you press the end key, or so to go to the end of your comp, and then you just reparent it to the same null. So now you get a seamless loop. see that front one. And then we do it with all the other ones. So copy them, unparent them, go to the end, reparent them. That's it. Then you get a seamless loop. Okay, what else is there? Yes, this is very important. Let's talk a bit about the composition, because the golden rule of animation is you need a good design. If your design is not good, no amount of animation tricks is going to save a bad design. So it can make it worse. So let's make sure that your design is good. What I did here is I basically used complementary colors. I used the Squirrel, which is a warm color like an orange, so it pops in the front, and this is our focal point. And then for the back, I used various hues of dark blue. And now let's go to something interesting. I use this quite often. It's the Fibonacci sequence. I just put it on. I use it as a guide layer. So what you want to do is you want to implement some of these Fibonacci guides, because it's just as humans, we are drawn to these Fibonacci ratios. It was invented by a very, very, very clever guy a long time ago, Fibonacci and Da Vinci, and all those clever Italians who drank lots of coffee and invented cool stuff. They invented all of this stuff for us. So we use the rule of thirds. So if the horizontal line here, I don't want that to be in the middle, because that's just going to look boring. So I brought it down so it's on this line here. I could have brought it down a bit further if I wanted to as well, but I felt that it looked quite nice here. Now, if you look here, this is quite interesting. Look at our Squirrel. Look how it follows the lines here. And this is just a happy accident. If you look here, it follows it. And I don't think it's because I'm a good designer. It's actually because this Fibonacci sequence works with motion as well. And if we just scrub through this, you can see how it perfectly, everything follows these lines. It's just because it's like a wave. You can see there on the front feet and arcs. It follows all of these, not perfectly, but there is a general, if you look at the front paw here, how it follows that arc there. So it's just, if you do any animation or design, it's always a good idea I just download this from the internet. Just download a copy of the Fibonacci, just Google Fibonacci ratios or golden ratio, and then you would get it, and just test your animation paths against that, test your designs. It works for everything design-wise, typography, anything. Just download these, and it will take you far in life. Okay, let's switch this off. And now for the next one, yes, let's look at the shadow quickly. The shadow is very easy to do. All I did is I copied the main character, and then I went on to effects, and I added two effects. The one is the fill effect, so I just gave it a solid fill, and I set the mode here to multiply, and then I used CC slant, which is a very, very nice effect where you can slant your layer or your comp. If you have a look here, you can play with the height here, and I usually only play with the height and the slant, so that gives you a nice effect. So that's basically it for this, for the shadow. Then for the character, for the Squirrel, what I did here is I added on that comp, I added that effect, the one that I talked about earlier, that shadow thrower, which is really, really nice. And then I also added a drop shadow. This is just basically to emulate that old cell animation vibe, because in the old days I used to use celluloid paper and then animate on top of that, and then when they take photos of that, there would be a slight drop shadow. So this is just to get that old retro vibe. Then I used an inner shadow on the character, and what the inner shadow does is I just use that then as a rim light to give the character some light. I set that the color to lighten, use the very light color. Basically what I do is I would pick this color and then make it almost white from there, drag the slider up, and then just set it to lighten. And then I also add a bit of noise, about 50% noise, just to give it that sort of effect. And then the last thing I did for the post-production is I just add a bit of chromatic aberration. Now this also gives it a nice retro feel. This is what it looks like without it, as you can see, and this is with it. I love using chromatic aberration on animations, but the trick is you need to be subtle. You can't take it too far. So all you need to do is just bring your fall off distance back, and then the aberration, I only use the aberration for the red -3, and the blue I set it at 3, and then the fall off distance I bought is 32. So it's subtle, but you can see in the tree up here, it actually adds some nice aberration there. So it just gives it that retro feel. And yes, I think basically that's everything.